Okay, so I hope you had a fruitful discussion. And today we are going to ask to report out groups 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let us start with group 5. Who is going to present on behalf of group 5?
That would be me.
Fantastic, please.
So I think I will start with what skills were we first identified as lacking. So there were quite a few skills. So teaching, facility management, managing people, grant writing, as well as the computational expertise, data management, negotiation and time management, marketing, image analysis, and also the three that we picked as the most important ones that we wanted to provide the training were training and education as the first one. The second one is advocacy and bureaucracy. And the third one is remote access. So to dive a little bit into the first choice of training and education, so training the trainers, but also teaching users. So this is something that is available, but also in some cases it is certainly lacking. So more staff can be trained, and we definitely can train more users, but due to capacity or due to the lack of certain training events, this is occasionally not available. And also part of the training education is establishing or teaching good imaging skills and practice. This is, of course, sometimes depending on the region. Perhaps in more developing regions, this is more critical than in a well-developed region. When it comes to our second choice, bureaucracy and advocacy, navigating bureaucracy can be seen as an obstacle. Of course, it's country and institution specific. And so providing training for this is a little bit challenging. But what we can definitely do is to advocate better to the community as to why imaging technologies are critical when it comes to research, and also advocating better to governments and funders. For example, working together to come up with white papers on the added value of imaging infrastructures. Our third choice was the remote access, so setting up infrastructure for efficient use and remote access, as well as flexible facility operations. And how do we tackle those challenges or those lack of trainings? One of the most obvious things is to continue to organize and work together to set up workshops and courses, but also provide job shadowing. Contextualized training is also critical. Mentorships, for example, through the APRF, as well as to develop training resources, for example, Microscopy Australia MyScope, or soon to be established database of training events that will be developed by BINA, but also for light microscopy, there's microlist that exists. Some of the training can be outsourced, for example, cooperation and support from institutional and managerial levels. And also, one of the last things that I want to mention is that when it comes to advocacy, collaborating or partnering of a developed imaging network with the developing imaging network or infrastructure would be very critical to let the funders know, as well as their governments, that imaging is important in life science research. And I think that's it from group 5.
Thank you very much, Bleb. Room 6.
That'll be me.
Right.
So we had 3 basic ones. We had engineering, outreach, and administrative support. And to go in a little bit deeper on those 3, for engineering, one of the things which we talked about is we can't all be experts in everything. We can't be experts in building the equipment, designing the molecular probes that we need, the image analysis, the running of the equipment. So this is where collaboration really comes in, and we need to partner with and have the ability to do that so that we can bring in the expertise so that the engineers build something that's useful for the biologists, right? Because I mean, engineers can build something that's fantastic, but it may not really help or answer a biological question. So putting, the biological question first, and then basically moving on, from there to get the solutions that will actually help to do that. And this is where, CZI could help in basically funding, resident engineers that work alongside, maybe specific projects that are submitted where there needs to be sometimes just somewhat of a minor tweak to an instrument to accomplish a much more global or solve a more global problem. And often that's not achievable in individual labs because they don't have the expertise on the engineering or on the probe, so, Janelia does a great job with Luke, in developing these probes, which are then, freely accessible, something, kind of similar to that. So in terms of outreach, we took a little bit different tact here, and we believe that there needs to be a paradigm shift where outreach is valued not only by our institution, but all the grant holders, right? All of the stakeholders, the grant funders, the institutions, the communities. And what this really needs and why this needs to happen is that we need advocacy, at the national level, but we also need our neighbor to kind of understand what we do and why it's important and why they should want to, fund it and why they would want to see it accomplished. And it, bridging that gap between, okay, we see these, great advances in science, but they start in the lab, and this whole, bench to bedside type of mentality. And in terms of this, on terms of the initiatives, we need advocacy and the science policy. And then, we do have, basically advocates that do work for us at the national level. But again, I think that this needs to start at the community level. And it also helps to get the next generation of scientists involved. Working with, the public school, younger kids, getting them excited about science. Somebody probably did that for each one of us. We can point to a person or a group of people that basically made us think science was cool and that that's something we wanted to do. And imaging is great because it's like, you can see the background behind me. It's pretty easy to explain even to a lay person what this is. When you try to explain to people, like what a gel is and what the significance of it is, their eyes tend to, roll to the back of their head and they tend to gloss over. And we need to have an appreciation, generate an appreciation of what Gustano's job was, right? He did a fantastic job, but it was a huge, heavy lift. He did have the support for it, but we need to have the stakeholders appreciate that for what it is and to put value behind that. So the third one was the administrative support. And this goes from everything from helping to run workshops, the logistics of it. Most of us, myself included, are not experts at, booking hotels and setting up all of the logistics that are required to have successful workshops. And these are really important. And one of the things we talked a lot about too is we've all become accustomed to doing virtual workshops and virtual conferences. And I think that this is the time that we can leverage this to have collaborative workshops. So instead of each one of us doing our own independent thing, is having a central organization, maybe CZI, sponsor workshops where we have participants both on the attendees and on the lecture side from all different groups, because the cost is fairly low. We've all become accustomed to this. And I think that it would build a much more inclusive group. So instead of, like I do a workshop, I know Claire does a workshop, and we cover very similar topics. But if we could combine and basically have, these group workshops or seminars or whatever you want to call them, where we have an opportunity to hear from and have participants from around the world. And I think the time challenge here, but we've become kind of accustomed to this, and it can be based by geography. But that way we wouldn't be kind of repeating a lot of the same things, and we'd also have a broader audience, and we'd also have a broader base. And that brings me to the last point, which we talked about, was with all these workshops, it can be hard to find where they are, and having somebody build a centralized repository where all the workshops, where everyone submits the workshop to this one place, instead of now we typically submit them to 5 or 6 or 7 different sites, Confocal, Bina, onward and onward, is having a curated site where over time we just get enough community buy-in that you're going to put your workshop, your seminar there, then it would increase both the audience and again the participation. And it does require some input and some manpower to basically build the site and curate it. And we realize it will take a little bit of time to get everyone to coalesce around that one site, but we believe that it's doable. We believe it would be very impactful. And that's it for group 6.
Thank you very much, Richard. Group number 7. Who will present on behalf of group 7? Let's have a look.
I think we didn't decide, but I can do that. So
if you don't mind, thank you.
If all the group agrees, so if no one says,
please, thank you.
Okay. Can I see the other screen? Okay. So the first place we put this technology users versus developers. That meaning that most of us in most of the fields, we are actually like users of technologies, and there are no local development of new technologies. There is not much development on software methodologies or hardware. And that combined, we mostly do what equipments, like the equipments that we buy, allow us to do. So one thing that we see is, I think it goes with some aspects that were mentioned on engineering and in the previous group, and it also has it is related to the fact that the kind of support we will have in the country. In the second place, maybe it's a bit down the square, but we put data management in general, which means big data, like analysis of big data, but not only restrict to that. It also means that if we consider light microscopy, EM microscopy, tomography, all these techniques, we have like huge amounts of data being generated, and there's lots of management involved on that. So there is one of the points that we raised as a point that we are concerned about. And in the third place, local support. As we were discussing, we realized that there are countries and fields that there is almost like no local support. You would have to wait for someone to come from abroad for many tasks. It is related also on how companies see that specific market. In other countries and fields, you can have at least a first level local support, which is quite immediate, like a few days. But if it's something more specific, that can take like weeks or even months if you have to wait for someone to come from abroad. And it goes also for the parts itself, as most of them will have to be imported. So we will mostly have to wait for that. Another point is when we talk about local support, thinking about maintenance in general, is the difficulty of having specific grants for maintenance contracts or maintenance itself. Like there are grants from time to time, probably in different ways in different countries in Latin America, but mostly you have grants for acquisition of equipments, and they're really rare for maintaining the equipment running. So I just, since we didn't discuss who would present, I just would like to open to the rest of the group if someone wants to add something, please. So that's it.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Any other comments from the group? Okay, then we'll move to group 8.
Yeah, thanks, Vlad. I'll introduce this one for us.
Thank you, Pete.
The skills available were fairly common. There was quite a lot of skills in most of the regions. But actually what came out was maybe the discrepancies between regions in certain core areas, especially when that's focusing maybe on serial EM, so 3D volume EM, CLEM, cryo EM, and so forth, and getting access to expertise, which could be limited by the barrier to enter the field to start with being so high, meaning actually it's not bringing people through into other facilities that already exist. So it's very limited in the field of expertise that's available to them to start with. So that was one of the things that was quite a discrepancy between regions that was noted. I think our first place, I think everyone, quite a few people put on their data science, big data, machine learning, data analysis, everything around that. And this isn't just regional, it's maybe more local as well. So nationally, expertise may exist in places, but locally, quite often that expertise is still missing on a local scale. I think that's probably applicable. I certainly thought it for myself. It was certainly something we do not major in. And I think everyone else was also similar minded, whether it be over in Germany or Brazil or wherever else, that this was a big area that it's probably the biggest expertise area missing, considering where science is going to be going forward in the future. And if we're going to tap into that market and be competitive, we need the expertise on hand. And that expertise is still fairly localized and niche still, even though it's an explosion of it, it's still not everywhere. So, and actually getting that expertise is really challenging because obviously the stock markets pay a lot more than we pay for bioinformaticians and expertise as well. And then actually what was also interesting was supporting writing grants. So again, this was a very regional discrepancy, and maybe the lack of contact with funders to know what the funders are actually requesting for. So it's not always implicit. It's not easy to know what to write. And I certainly think in Brazil, there was a big discussion about a lot of tick boxes that have questions that are not related to the science to start with. So I guess in the UK, we had pathways to impact, developing how our science is going to be publicized to the lay audience, the general scientists, not to experts. And it's quite hard to know what to put in those tick boxes. So there was a lot of discussion around that as well. I don't think it was quite a thing. I think the regional discrepancies was a big thing. And one thing we did think, there are good meetings that exist in some regions that could be duplicated, copy and paste, bringing in local people to kind of duplicate what is proven to work in some regions into other areas. And actually, I think in the one particular case, the 3D EM meeting that's coming up virtually in a couple of weeks' time is something that wasn't noted outside of some of the colleagues in there, but was certainly already, because it's virtual, and open access could be a real benefit. So I think the training is actually just opening up, and publicity. How do you get the information to everyone? That was a big, how do you promote, even in the local regions, how do you access your target audience? That was another of the problems that we thought was missing in the skill set. We don't have the skill set to be advertisers. So I don't know if that's the right word to use. Anyway, I think we're running late and I'm just about to go on holiday. So cheers, everyone.
That's a fantastic closure, Pete. Thank you, everyone. This was extremely helpful to know, and we see tremendous results from this. And hopefully that will also align the community on the type of the skills that are needed in different regions.